When most people think of Paul McCartney, they picture the youthful Beatle with catchy bass lines and that unmistakable sparkle in his eye. The mastermind behind timeless classics, a global superstar who reshaped pop music as we know it. But beneath the shiny surface of knighthood, roaring stadiums, and that ever-charismatic grin, lies a man with sharp instincts and even sharper viewpoints. While Paul has carefully maintained a polished, diplomatic public image, those who've collaborated with him understand there's much more beneath the facade. When it comes to music, Paul doesn't mince words. He knows precisely what strikes a chord and what falls flat. Over the years, he's quietly but firmly clashed with some of the biggest names in the industry, and his critiques ran far deeper than mere personality conflicts. They exposed fundamental artistic divides about what music should represent. Today, we dive into the 6 bands Paul McCartney simply couldn't stand, peeling back the layers to reveal why even legends weren't immune to the Beatles' not-so-sweet criticisms. It all kicks off with the rivalry that helped define a generation, the Rolling Stones. For decades, fans have glorified the so-called Battle of the Bands, the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. 2 monumental groups, each pushing the other to new heights in what was often portrayed as a friendly competition. But behind the scenes, Paul's feelings were anything but cordial. During a quiet Abbey Road recording session in 1968, McCartney's mask slipped, and he reportedly dismissed the Stones as little more than a blues cover band that had stumbled into luck. That barbed comment never made it to the tabloids back then, but it set the stage for a simmering tension that would stretch across decades. Jump to 2021, and Paul was still casting subtle shade. In an interview with The New Yorker, he reiterated his stance, saying, "The Stones are a blues cover band. Our net was cast a bit wider." Not one to shy away from a comeback, Mick Jagger fired back with a quip about the Beatles being just a 4-piece band with a single drummer, referencing the long-running Ringo Starr debate. Insiders say Paul always viewed the Stones as followers rather than innovators. A band playing catch-up, releasing albums that echoed Beatles' groundbreaking ideas months after they debuted. One particularly tense episode occurred in 1969 when John Lennon proposed producing a Stones record. Paul was reportedly furious, questioning why John would waste time on a band he considered unoriginal. Over the years, McCartney has grudgingly praised a few Stones songs, but his tone never lost that edge. Even in interviews, there's an unmistakable coolness, a hint of unresolved rivalry simmering beneath the surface. If Paul could be so forthright about peers from his own era, the story only intensifies when it comes to the punks who came crashing through the music scene, trying to dismantle everything. Punk rock, and the Sex Pistols in particular, struck a raw nerve with Paul. If any movement symbolized rebellion against the polished world he helped build, it was punk, wild, chaotic, and defiantly rough around the edges. Their scorn for musical tradition wasn't just a style. It was a direct challenge. To Paul, their sound was an assault on everything he stood for, a jarring noise that defied the very craft of musicianship. He reportedly described their music as nothing more than an assault on the ears, unable to grasp how anyone could boast about not knowing how to play their instruments properly. But the disdain wasn't one-sided. Johnny Rotten, notorious for his biting honesty, branded Paul a relic, a dinosaur trapped in a bygone era, and punk declared war on the old guard. The rivalry hit a particularly personal note when, according to Wings drummer Denny Seiwell, the Sex Pistols used Beatles posters for target practice during rehearsals. Paul tried to brush it off with a laugh, but those close to him say it stung deeper than he admitted. The tension escalated further in early 1977, when both bands were recording at London's AIR studios. Paul approached the Pistols in the hallway, offering a hand of goodwill, only for Sid Vicious to mutter, "Establishment sellout," under his breath. That was the final straw. Paul turned on his heel and never looked back, choosing silence over confrontation from that moment on. This story reveals more than just a clash of musical tastes. It captures a collision of eras and ideals. Paul McCartney, who helped usher in a golden age of pop, saw punk as a chaotic force threatening everything he worked so hard to perfect. The Sex Pistols weren't just a band. They were a rebellion that cut deep into the legacy of the Beatles, sparking an irreparable divide. What's fascinating here is how these tensions echo larger cultural battles between tradition and upheaval, precision and raw expression, the polished and the primal. Paul's frankness about these rivalries offers a rare glimpse into the passionate, often combative heart of a musical genius who never settled for mediocrity. He believed in pushing boundaries, but only on his own terms. Behind every great artist is a story of conflict, resistance, and reinvention. Paul McCartney's relationship with these bands wasn't just about competition. It was a reflection of his vision for music itself. His sharp critiques remind us that greatness often demands standing firm, challenging the status quo, even if it means ruffling some feathers along the way. And as we unravel these stories, it becomes clear that the line between admiration and rivalry is often razor-thin, colored by years of personal histories and artistic battles. Even now, decades later, those echoes resonate. Paul's unwavering standards and bold opinions continue to shape how we understand not just the Beatles, but the whole tapestry of popular music. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the tales of other bands that faced Paul's fierce judgment and explore how these dynamics influenced the ever-changing landscape of rock and roll. The drama isn't over yet, and the music world still feels the tremors of those legendary clashes. Years down the line, Paul McCartney would admit, somewhat reluctantly, that punk rock did shake up the music scene in a way that cleared the air. But when it came to the Sex Pistols, his words were sharp yet restrained, dismissing them as "not my cup of tea," delivered with a stare so cold it spoke volumes beyond his clipped response. The punk movement wasn't just noise to Paul. It was a challenge to everything he and the Beatles had built. Yet, the next rivalry wasn't fueled by rebellion or outright dismissal. It stemmed from a different place, a place where admiration turned into frustration. Oasis, imitation or insult? Paul had dealt with his share of imitators, but Oasis was a whole new level of bold, loud, and unapologetic. When the Gallagher brothers burst onto the scene in the 90s, Britain's rock revival came with swagger and attitude. Liam and Noel weren't shy about their Beatles obsession. They copied the look, the attitude, even the poses. Their admiration shouted from every stage and interview. Without the Beatles, there would be no Oasis, they claimed openly. For the public, it sounded like a tribute. But Paul saw it differently. He initially kept it polite, calling Oasis a good band with plenty of energy. But behind closed doors, his patience wore thin. Their fixation felt shallow, more a marketing ploy than genuine homage. What stung the most was the arrogance behind it. Noel Gallagher didn't just admire the Beatles. He boasted that Oasis was bigger than them, echoing Lennon's famous 1966 claim, but without the humility or subtlety. To Paul, this wasn't respect. It was hubris. The Beatles had earned their place through grit, innovation, and real-life experience, not just loud chords and catchy hooks. "It's not enough to copy the chords," Paul once confided to a friend. "You've got to live the life." The entitlement that Oasis carried felt like chasing shadows, rather than making something authentic. And Paul resented that deeply. Still, Oasis wasn't the only band walking this fine line between flattery and frustration. Another group ran even deeper with their mimicry, yet somehow charmed their way into Beatles history. The Monkees. Manufactured and mocked, they were a pop culture phenomenon, a TV show sensation, chart toppers, and fan favorites. But for Paul, they were little more than a plastic parody. He reportedly changed the dial whenever one of their songs played on the radio. His issue wasn't just the music. It was the whole idea of fame without struggle. While Paul endured grueling nights in Hamburg's gritty clubs, sleeping in less-than-ideal places, grinding out live performances, the Monkees were four actors pretending to be musicians, handed instant stardom on a silver platter. What drove Paul to frustration was when the Monkees started borrowing the Beatles' psychedelic style after the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. George Harrison once recalled Paul venting about them, saying, "They're stealing our blueprint without doing any of the work." The resentment wasn't just private, it spilled into real-life encounters. At a 1968 party in Los Angeles, Paul walked away mid-conversation with Monkees frontman Mickey Dolenz. Dolenz later reflected, "I don't think he ever saw us as real musicians." Even as the Monkees fought for creative control and began writing their own material, Paul's view remained unchanged. Years later, when asked about them in a 2011 interview, Paul offered a classic backhanded compliment. Catchy tunes, but certainly no Beatles. His smile might have softened with time, but the cool distance never quite melted away. Then came a band that didn't try to mimic the Beatles. They surpassed them on the charts at a moment when Paul's own chart Disco Kings, who ruled the late 70s with their signature falsetto harmonies and the record-breaking soundtrack for Saturday Night Fever. To many, the Gibb brothers were pop music innovators, bringing a fresh sound to a new generation hungry for dance floor hits. But Paul saw things differently. To him, they were a lighter, flashier version of the Beatles, recycling classic pop formulas with drum machines and soaring vocals, but lacking the soul and depth that defined true artistry. The Bee Gees' success was undeniable, but Paul's tone carried a hint of bitterness, as if watching the throne slip away with each disco beat. One can almost imagine Paul, the seasoned musician, watching from the sidelines as a new wave of sound swept through, one that dazzled the masses but somehow missed the mark in his eyes. The legacy he and the Beatles carved wasn't just about hits or fame. It was about authenticity, innovation, and living the music. And that's what set his critiques apart. They weren't just about sound, but spirit. Paul understood better than anyone that music is more than notes on a page. It's the story behind them. Through every clash, from punk to pop, from imitators to innovators, Paul McCartney's unfiltered opinions peeled back the glamorous veneer of the music industry. What makes his story so compelling isn't just his musical genius, but his fierce conviction about what music should be. These rivalries weren't mere celebrity squabbles. They were reflections of his passion for artistry and integrity. As the decades roll on, it becomes clear that even icons aren't immune to the sting of competition or the complexities of admiration tangled with envy. And as the curtain falls on this chapter of musical feuds, one thing is certain: Paul McCartney's legacy is as much about his outspoken critiques as it is about the timeless songs that defined a generation. The stories behind these rivalries offer a rare glimpse into the heart of a man who shaped pop culture forever, never afraid to speak his truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. But if Paul had grudges against disco kings or punk provocateurs, none matched the complicated relationship he shared with the Beach Boys. What began as inspiration eventually turned into one of the most complex rivalries in music history. Paul McCartney famously called "God Only Knows" the perfect song, a rare compliment from someone known for his guarded praise. But beneath that admiration lay a tension few ever saw. When the Beach Boys released Pet Sounds in 1966, it wasn't just another album for Paul, it was a revelation. He played it on repeat, dissecting every harmony, every subtle arrangement. Beatles producer George Martin later admitted that Pet Sounds was a spark that ignited the creation of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yet, admiration gave way to competition as Brian Wilson embarked on the ambitious Smile project. When Wilson abandoned the album due to his mental health struggles, Paul's empathy was said to cool. "If you can't finish what you start," Paul reportedly remarked, "you shouldn't be in this business. We push through no matter what." The rivalry deepened during a 1967 dinner party at Brian Wilson's home. Paul, perhaps without meaning to wound, criticized several Beach Boys tracks as repetitive and simplistic. Wilson was so affected by the remarks he reportedly went silent for days. Even decades later, when asked about the Beach Boys, Paul's praise was always measured. "They had lovely harmonies," he said, "but I think people overstate their influence. We were already on our way." Revisiting God Only Knows years later, Paul called it perfect. Yes, but only for the American pop scene of its time. Music historian David Leaf captured the essence of this complex dance perfectly. Paul respects Brian Wilson's work, but he'll never fully admit how deeply it pushed him, because doing so would mean acknowledging that the Beatles were shaped not just by their own genius, but by others' creativity as well. And that, perhaps, is the sharpest truth hidden beneath all these rivalries. It's not just about who Paul McCartney couldn't stand, but about those he secretly admired and who quietly inspired him. Now, looking at Paul's journey through the lens of luxury and finance reveals another side of the legend. From the early days playing in Hamburg clubs to filling arenas worldwide, Paul's financial acumen has been as sharp as his musical talents. His collection of luxury cars has included classic Jaguars and Rolls-Royces, reflecting a taste for timeless elegance rather than flashy excess. On his wrist, he's often been seen wearing exquisite watches, from vintage Rolexes to modern high-end brands, symbolizing a balance of tradition and modernity. Real estate is a cornerstone of his wealth, with properties spanning from his sprawling English countryside estate to luxurious homes in the U.S., all managed with discretion and care. Paul's ownership of private jets has allowed him to seamlessly navigate global tours and business ventures, a necessity for a career spanning continents and decades. Beyond performance, Paul's business ventures are equally impressive. He has held stakes in various publishing companies, ensuring his songwriting royalties remain a steady source of income. His partnerships and collaborations, from charitable foundations to exclusive merchandise lines, highlight his savvy understanding of brand value. Insurance policies covering his health, career, and assets have provided layers of protection, guarding against the uncertainties of a long and demanding profession. The key financial lesson here? Paul McCartney's story is a masterclass in diversification and legacy building. His careful balance of artistic integrity and business savvy shows how sustained success isn't just about talent. It's about protecting and growing what you create, understanding the market, and planning for the future. His career reflects a blend of passion and prudence, a reminder that behind every icon's shine is a calculated, thoughtful approach to wealth. So what do you make of this legendary figure's battles and triumphs? From punks who challenged his era, disco rivals who rewrote charts, to the Beach Boys who quietly pushed him to new heights, Paul McCartney's story is one of relentless passion, fierce protection of legacy, and an undeniable influence on music history. And behind all the drama and rivalry, there's a man who never stopped evolving, whose impact continues to ripple through every corner of pop culture. Which rivalry surprised you the most? Was Paul's guarded stance a sign of a perfectionist grappling with change, or just a fiercely protective artist standing his ground? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you've enjoyed diving into this lesser-known side of a true music titan, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because every legend story has chapters waiting to be uncovered, and this is just one of many untold tales from the world of music. And there you have it, Paul McCartney, the icon who didn't just shape music history,